Joe Stevens, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning. I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Boy, it has been a long time since we have spoken to each other. Uh,
It
just for
has.
just for my listeners, I was a student of yours back in 2000 and 2000 and 2001 at Parkersburg High School.
That was 3 rooms ago for me.
Wow.
Yeah, I've
So
moved around a lot since then.
so you are a fairly accomplished person in your life. You're an author, you're a school teacher, you've been a youth minister, you've done a lot of different things. How many years have you been teaching now, Joe?
Well, I'm getting ready tomorrow to start my 24th year at PHS, Parkersburg High School. And I taught for 2 years in a different county before that. And in between those, I worked at a church for 6 years. So 26 or so at this point as a
Wow,
full-time teacher.
wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. I'm not certain that I have heard of many teachers recently getting that far along. So that's quite an accomplishment.
Well, thank you. I really enjoy it. I love my kids, so it makes it easy.
Yeah. Well, and Parkersburg's kind of its own weird little hamlet of sorts.
That's for sure.
That it very conservative city for the most part. Uh, you know, up until maybe when was it 10 years ago when the new highway came through town. Pretty low crime rate, pretty low,
Mhm.
pretty low drug use rate. Really a quiet little city on the western side of the state.
Right. Although, as a teacher, you do become aware that there's a little more going on than people may think. I don't know if you wanted me to tell stories or anything
Sure.
at this point, but
Yeah. No, that's
um,
fine.
when when I first started teaching at PHS, I became aware of some things that I never would have guessed. Um, in the late '90s, early 2000s, about the time you were actually at PHS, um, uh, Parkersburg was a recruiting ground and it was actually a there was a fight going on between gangs, especially for ground. Um,
Territory.
gangs from Cleveland, gangs from Cleveland and Columbus were kind of going back and forth over it. And I actually had a couple of students who came and went, and I found out afterward had gone to prison because they were here in Parkersburg, um, not not really as students, but instead as recruiters.
Yeah.
They were secretly here to try and stake their claim to the territory. So it wasn't quite as quiet. That's not a good thing, but wasn't quite as
Right.
quiet as it seemed.
And those rumors floated around students as well. Um,
Right.
the new kid came in. Oh, where are you from? Ohio. We're at in Ohio. And I remember a couple of kids from Columbus and Cleveland, and as soon as they were here, they were gone again.
Right.
So are you still doing? Are you still the sponsor of the speech and debate team? What are you doing now at Parkersburg High School?
No, I've moved on from that. Although I do still help with that. I still judge tournaments and things like that. And but Lori Zyla is just amazing. She's the theater and speech person now.
Okay.
So I judge um, student congress and speech tournaments whenever I can. But not long after you left, actually, maybe 4 years, I gave up the speech team so that I could take over student council, and I've done that ever since. And then I've also I was asked to help a couple of young teachers who were taking over the senior cabinet just for a couple of years until they got their feet on the ground, and have been one of the sponsors ever since. Um, you know, famous last words. It'll only be for a year or two,
Right.
and so.
Right.
Uh, so there are three of us that do that. So those are the two main things I do outside of teaching are the student council and senior cabinet.
Cool. Well, those kids are lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you. I enjoy that as well.
Ha,
Both of them.
sure. I know that shortly after uh, my class graduated, Parkersburg went to switched from the junior high model to the middle school model, and then the ninth graders have since moved up to
Right.
Parkersburg High School. How did that transition go?
Well, to be generous, I guess you'd say the first year, especially, was or first 2 years were um, interesting. To be more frank, they were really terrible. The the ninth graders came up, and it, the school did some things that seemed like good ideas at the time, but they didn't work out really well. They sequestered the freshmen up on the third floor of the main building, so that there was no interaction almost between the freshmen and the rest of the school. And the freshmen kind of went wild, and the seniors were actually, I mean, it was so bad that the seniors were actually afraid of them.
Oh wow.
um, it was just it just didn't work out really well. But after a couple of years, when it became just the norm, and they changed the system, like they had a freshman administrator up there, so they kind of tried to make it like a separate school,
Okay.
and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
Um, and so when they finally figured that out and just made the freshmen part of
Part
the
of the
school,
school.
it it smoothed things out a lot. So now it's not even. I mean, the kids now don't even remember a time when there wasn't a middle school system,
Yeah.
and so uh, it's hard for me to remember what it was like before that. And
Yeah.
the freshmen are just integrated. So, but the first 2 years were rough.
Yeah.
We lost a few teachers over it.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I
Yeah,
I
well,
I left West Virginia in December of 2009. So I haven't been back to Parkersburg since 2009. I used to be in the Army National Guard, and I was with a unit out of Williamstown that flew helicopters, one of the medical aviation units there. And it seemed like once every 8 or 9 months, I'd at least walk the grounds at Parkersburg High School. Um, for folks who don't know, or folks who are unfamiliar with Parkersburg High School, it is one of the more beautiful buildings uh,
definitely
in not only the entire state, but certainly within probably a 3.5 or 4 hour drive of anywhere of Parkersburg. Um, Beautiful
agreed.
historic building, just just a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah, it really is. Just a little bit of history. We celebrated our 100th graduating class in that building just a couple of years ago,
Oh wow.
and it was quite a celebration. We actually spent an entire year celebrating that. We had a commemorative 5K run and walk, and we had several things. And the 100th class was kind of, they treated like royalty a little bit. Um, but the building was started in 1915, and I think it was finished in 1917 or 18.
Yeah.
And it was actually designed by the same gentleman that designed our state penitentiary, which is now a world famous haunted site. Um, which, as a result, I mean, it looks a good bit like the prison,
It
and so a lot of
now
people,
that you say that, it does.
yeah, people when they look at it, they have one of two reactions. They either say it looks like a castle or it looks like a prison. Um, and I think it probably has to do with whether you were a student there or not. But yeah, it is a beautiful old building, but it's changed a lot, even since you were there.
Yeah.
Um, they've brightened the building up a lot. It's all air conditioned. The ceilings are dropped. The lighting has changed. You remember
I
it was kind of dungeon like. Um,
In many
it's not like
classrooms.
that anymore, right? But it's changed. It's gotten more modernized on the inside,
Well, progress, right?
right? And that was almost all as a result of the move to the middle schools. The state basically said, um, either you guys change to a middle school system and we're going to give you several $1,000,000 to update your schools, or you stay the way you are, and we're not only not going to give you that money, but we're going to cut your your funding. And so this the schools just the county or the state decided or the county decided they didn't have any choice.
Yeah.
So um,
So
it it's a completely different building.
yeah, and I know that some of the renovations started before I left West Virginia. The annex kind of is no more. It still stands, but it's not really used for classes, is my understanding. The stadium
Right,
has fallen into disrepair over the over the years, and
right,
then the attempts to repair it have failed and come short on funding. So a
right.
you know a once glorious history and past has been kind of not abandoned or left for naught, but certainly left to disrepair.
Right. Um, there's an organization that's working really hard to try and pick that back up. That we did get one half of the stadium redone, and so it looks nice. But the visitor side um, is
Without
you're not
seats.
allowed.
Yeah,
Right, right. We're not allowed to use it, and it's it's basically was deemed unsafe.
yeah,
It was just so. But the the attempt to get the whole stadium done, the problem they ran into was the estimates for how to how much it was going to cost were just wildly too low, mainly because of ADA requirements, Americans with Disabilities Act.
right.
There's just were certain things that had to happen that they didn't take into consideration. And well, the reality is the organization that was put in charge of it wasn't actually as in charge of it as they had hoped to be. The board was actually in charge of signing off on overages and spending and things like that. And there was a period of time where basically they just rubber stamped it and the cost just ballooned. And as a result, that committee, the stadium committee, got blamed for a lot of things. I have a good friend that was the head of that, and he was vilified. And he's a man who really cares about PHS. And a lot of things that happened were completely beyond his control.
Yeah,
And but it was a shame. I'm hoping that eventually they'll get to a point where it is a grand old stadium, and I'm
yeah,
hoping that someday it'll be open on both sides.
yeah. I remember the television show in the mid 2000s ish, Friday Night Lights, and boy, they could have
Right.
filmed that. They could have filmed that right in our high school stadium. The entire town
Exactly.
would
Yeah.
show up for every game. And we'd fill up the visitor side too if we had to. Just
Right.
lots and lots of history there. Folks who have been in Parkersburg their entire lives can recite to you from memory, about Parkersburg High School and the stadium and just stories beyond stories. And that's part of like, I'm hoping to get more guests from Parkersburg on the podcast to share some of those stories. And it's really kind of selfish because I enjoy those stories. I'm not
Right.
necessarily a history buff, but I enjoy storytelling, and I enjoy when others tell stories about the things that they've done.
Yeah.
So the stadium is unfortunately in disrepair. It hasn't been completed the way it needs to be done. Parkersburg High School, even when I was there in the very late 90s and early 2000s, there were these little rumblings about the big red Indian as the mascot, and how do we handle the big red Indian. And I, as a former student there, while I was a student, I'm not sure that I could ever remember saying to myself or thinking to myself, boy, I think the big red Indian's a racist symbol. What's the feeling around Parkersburg High School and around town about that?
Well, those are two very distinct questions. Who you ask that question will make a big difference in what the answer is. If you ask, um, and I think it's drawn along age lines. Um,
I can see
and
that.
I follow. There's a Facebook page called "Once a Big Red, Always a Big Red," and you can see on that. Um, you could for a while two competing um, petitions.
Uh-huh.
One for changing the mascot and one for keeping the mascot. And I don't know the exact numbers, but the last time I checked, there were 1,500 signatures on the petition to change the mascot and roughly 10,000 signatures to keep it.
Wow.
And the feeling among the group who believe it to be racist um, is that um, there is no room for any kind of Native American symbology, that it needs to be changed to something altogether different, that there's no way that that can be a tribute. But if you ask people who are alumni of the school, their feeling is, well, basically 180 from that. And that is partly that they don't believe it to be racist, but I think it has more to do with the idea that that's the way it was. That's my tradition. Um, and so they don't want to see that change.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure that a lot of the people who are looking at it are really thinking of it in terms of whether it is racist or not. They're thinking of it in terms of that's how it was when I was in school, so that's how I want it to stay.
Right.
And that's a big thing at Parkersburg High School in general, not just with the Indian, but with everything. I mean, they want things to stay exactly as they were
Right.
because they feel like that's the way it always was. In reality, it's the way it was when they were there, but that doesn't mean it's the way it always was. I mean, the reality is we weren't always the Indians.
Right.
um, we were the Big Red, not the Big Reds. We were the Big Red, and we had no mascot
Mascot.
for quite a while. There was no mascot at all, and then that happened in maybe the 50s or the 60s.
Yeah.
Is when the Indian became.
The history that I've read is somewhere in the mid 50s. The Indian became the mascot, um, and it's been that way since in the mid 50s. So we're looking
Right.
at 65 plus years now of
Right.
the Big Red Indian.
Right. It's a long tradition, but the reality is that we do need to examine whether this is offensive to the people that are being represented, and it's not the historical tradition that people think it is. It's not been since 1915 when the
Right.
building opened. It's
Right.
so um, I I think there are ways to make something like this respectful and a tribute to Native Americans. Um, but I think there's also just room for the possibility that we could just move on, just do something different, a little, uh, you know. Um, but the question then becomes, where do we draw the line at what
And,
symbols are okay?
and it does become kind of a slippery slope, right? The
Right,
crosstown rivals, the
right,
Parkersburg South Patriots. You know, um,
right,
it, you've got several other high schools in the state that are Native American themed, that are Indian themed. You've got several other schools around the state that use other different mascots, the rebels, so to speak.
right.
And,
I
and
don't know if I don't. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
go, no, that's okay.
I don't know if you know this. Ritchie County is next door to us. They're the Ritchie Rebels. I
Uh
don't
huh.
know if you know this, but Parkersburg South, PHS's crosstown rival, when they were built, when that school was created, their original mascot was going to be the Rebels. They were going to be the South Rebels, and um, the county said no, you're not allowed to do that. Even back then in the '60s, they said no, that's too controversial.
Yeah.
Um, and so, and they even, they, they had a fight song, but then their unofficial fight song was Dixie. And I can remember in the 70s, um, that song was banned. They weren't allowed to play it. The
Oh
band
wow.
couldn't play it. They couldn't sing it at games. And there was a radio station that doesn't exist anymore, WKYG, and they, as a way to kind of stand up for the kids at South who wanted to keep playing the song, about once an hour they would play that song, and eventually public pressure, they gave in and let them continue to play it. But I, I think it worked out the way it should have. It slowly just kind of died away.
Yeah.
It went away by itself, rather than being forced out. Um,
Well,
but
and you look at
if you look
popular
at
culture right now, you have the 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 Washington football team, as it's now
right,
as it's now called, formerly known as the Washington Redskins. Um, the culture is changing, and when a pro sports team says, you know what, I think it's time for us to change, maybe the rest of culture uh, is going to be ready to as well. And how much of that is social pressure or political pressure. Neither of us has sat behind those closed doors, so we don't know exactly what the
right,
what the conditions were to say we need to change this. Um,
right.
me personally, having been uh, involved in some of the instruction of the Big Red Indian over time, I was heavily involved with the Catawba Indian dancers through the Boy
Mm,
Scouts of America, and they were consulted on several occasions to teach and instruct and do some things with the Big Red Indian, to make sure that we got it right, to make sure that it was done right. Um, but like you said, is there room for improvement? Is there a way to make this more honorary? Yeah, sure. I, but I don't know how long that sentiment is going to last.
I don't either. We seem to go through waves of this where, every 10 or 15, it seems like every generation, there's a group that says, hey, this is racist. Let's change this. And public sentiment from the city, um, just won't stand for it. I don't know. But I feel like that's eroding. I feel like,
Yeah,
alumni who are the diehard kind of rabid, you can't make any changes, are dying away, literally dying away.
right.
Um, I can remember when I first started. Well, it wasn't when I first started. It was, when Ralph Board was the principal at Parkersburg High School. He he wanted to, have a, a sign put up on one of the walls in the school, or on the outside wall, that said West Virginia School of Excellence. And he actually got death threats because that would kind of, change the look of the front of the school.
Oh wow.
But this year, yeah, but this year we put in a new door on the side. It's a man trap for people to get into the building.
Hmm.
And
A
I
man
was
trap. I
expecting there
like.
to be some. Yeah, well, that's the actual name of those things. They're called man traps because you go in, you get
It's
buzzed
a
into the little entryway, and then you have to get buzzed in again,
Yeah,
to make sure you're wearing a mask or you have ID or something like
yeah.
that.
My kids'
Um,
elementary school just put one in.
right. Um, and I was expecting there to be some controversy over that, and not a word was said. Um, so I think, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if by the time I retire, that mascot is gone. So
Well, eh,
I wouldn't be. I
well, we'll
don't.
see. We'll see what the future holds. I
Yeah.
saw your dear wife walk through the background. You got
Uh,
remarried what, 2 years
yeah.
ago?
Yeah. June of 2018. It's the best thing that ever
Congratulations again.
happened to me. Thank you. Thank you. She's an amazing woman.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
you say
Yeah.
so all the time. So, and I believe you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you probably don't want to get me started on that, because you don't want to be here for an hour and a half,
Oh,
with me
yeah.
talking about Sarah.
Oh, you know, yeah, Joe, you and I are the kind of people who honor and revere women. You and I are both religious fellows. We understand that women are sacred. And
Amen.
there's not, this is my personal opinion here, um, there's not enough good men around that honor their good women enough publicly, um, to the point where generally speaking, women should say, I'm worth that.
Mm. Yeah, uh, they deserve to be treated. I'm not saying that they should be put up on a pedestal or treated as fragile little creatures, but
Of course.
I've always argued that women who want to be equal to men are shooting too low, and I just think that women are amazing creations, and men need to appreciate them more
Yeah,
and
you're not wrong.
treat them with respect. Well,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah, you're certainly not wrong, and we need more men in society to be able to say that, and to be able to live that. So, uh, so you, if memory serves me right, in like the mid 2010s, 2014, 2015, you decided that you wanted to be an author. You wanted to write some books,
Hmm.
and you've got
That
two books
actually,
now.
oh no, I'm working on my sixth one.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that tells you how far
Um,
behind I
yeah.
am on keeping track of folks. So you're working on a sixth
um,
book
I,
now.
yeah, all in the same series. Um, Backing up a little bit, I won't take too long, but I
No,
actually started writing. The, okay,
go ahead.
I actually started writing. Okay, I actually started writing the main character. His name is Harry Shalin. Actually started a book about him way back in the 80s, when I was in college. And just as part of a creative writing class, I wrote a scene about this private detective named Harry Shalin. And at that time, he was just this kind of a bumbling idiot who, if he solved a crime, it was completely by accident. It was intended to be comedic. But slowly over the years, it morphed into this completely different character. And he's married to this woman named Dee, and he is um, he's a character who uh, believes himself to be kind of a knight born out of time. Um, he's very much me. He believes in being kind and respectful and standing up for the downtrodden and standing up for women. And so he's one of these characters. He's inspired by an author named Robert B. Parker, who wrote the Spencer books, who's probably he's kind of like the grandfather of the, well, the grandfather, I guess, would be Raymond Chandler. But anyway, he's kind of inspired by that. He's a little bit better than your average guy. He can shoot straight, can hit hard, but he's kind and charitable. And so I started this book. I knew what the name of it was going to be, but I wrote the first 50 pages about 100 times. I would write them and throw them away and write them and throw them away. And I just happened to mention to a young lady, excuse me, named Annie, was a student of mine, that I was a frustrated author because she was a frustrated author, um, and that I had started a book several times. And for the rest of the school year, she bugged me about it constantly. Have you started that book yet? Have you started that book yet? To the point where I did, just to get her to shut up. And I finished it, and I shopped it to several different um, agents and publishers, and never really got anywhere with that. So I published it independently, and I enjoyed writing it so much. And I didn't sell tons of books, but I enjoyed it. So I wrote three more in that series, the Shaylin Adventures, and then I decided one day, I had originally planned to continue the series from where it was and kind of pick up with a new character, kind of being added into the detective practice. But somebody asked me, how did Harry and Dee meet? Um, how did they get married? And so it seemed like a good idea to kind of George Lucas it. And so now I'm in the midst of going back, and I started with the day that they actually meet and fall in love, and they meet and fall in love in the same day. um, and I'm
Because why
writing,
not?
uh, yeah. They just kind of looked at each other and knew, which is kind of weird because, well, that's what happened with Sarah and me. But anyway, um, I'm in the second of what I call the Shaylin Origins. And the goal here is to have 7 books total that tell from the time they meet to the point where the 7th book ends. And then I'll probably carry it on from there. Um, but if you ever go to my website, you'll notice that you can't, there are no links to buy the books. I published all of those independently, but my plan now is once I finish this 6th book, which I'm about a fourth of the way through the rough draft, I want to shop the whole series to agents and publishing houses. Publishing houses love books where they know that there is a sustained market. Like they're not just looking at one book; they're looking at 6 books that they can publish in
Over time.
over time and make lots of money.
Yeah.
And so that's really been my goal all along. Well, a goal, not my goal, my one goal, but a goal is to be published traditionally. It's just something I've always, it's always been in the back of my mind. When I was growing up, my 3 goals, my 3 careers were I wanted to be the first baseman for the Cincinnati Reds, and I couldn't hit a curveball, so that was out. Or a teacher, or a million-selling author. And so I got the teacher part. Hopefully, maybe before I die, I'll be a million-selling author.
I hope
So
I hope you sell 10 million.
I hope so too. That was a long answer to a short question.
Oh, no. That's a beautiful answer to a pointed question. So you're working on this 6th book, and what drew you to writing to begin with? What sparked you to say I want to write?
It's kind of a cliche, but well, there are 2 answers. One, I don't remember not enjoying writing. I have a big fat green notebook in a box somewhere of stories that I wrote starting in first grade. I remember there are several of them in my mom's handwriting because my handwriting was so bad as a first grader that in order for the teacher to be able to read it, she'd translate it for me. But the other half is it's just I don't feel like I can't not write. I just enjoy it. It's just a part of me. And when I'm not writing fiction, I write for an online magazine called Clutch MOV. It's a lifestyle magazine for the Mid-Ohio Valley. It's kind of a magazine that points up the positives of the Mid-Ohio Valley. So I do theater reviews for them and write about restaurants. And it's just it's baked right into me. I don't ever remember not wanting to write, even if it wasn't to make money. It was just because it's part of me.
Right. So as a young man and even as an older young man, I wrote for the high school newspaper, my senior year there in 2001, and loved it. But then I figured out that writing wasn't for me. And through the years and through the growth of technology and computers, I tried to write a blog several times, and it just wasn't my thing. And now I've found podcasting. And that's part that, like, I've always been a talker. I didn't start speaking until I was almost 4, according to my mom, and I haven't shut up since. So, and I've been a guest on a few different podcasts, and finally in my head it clicked, like, hey, this is for me. So I've enjoyed writing, but figured out I wasn't very good at it. I'm a much better talker than I am a writer. And that, both both media are wonderful, and they have their own things. I really respect people that write. Their brains just work differently than mine, and that's something that I notice.
Well, well, thank you. I think that the reason why writers' minds work differently than speakers is the way in which they work differently is that they work more slowly. Um, I read something once by an author who said that people always want them to come to parties and things like that because they read their books and they think they're going to be fascinating people, and then when they finally meet them, they realize they're really not. And I'm not saying I'm not a fascinating person. I have no idea, but um, what what you communicate in writing, it's like you said, you are more geared toward oral communication, and I do that. I am an oral communications teacher, but I'm a lot better in writing than I am in talking.
Yeah,
I mean, I can talk a lot, but the quality of the communication is a whole lot better in writing than it is in verbally. And I think it's just you're right. It's just the way your brain works. It just
yeah,
works differently when you're a writer.
and you know, and it's not to say it's bad or good or either way. It's just different. Um,
Right.
yeah, it's just different, and it takes all kinds of people to fit in a society. So, um, Joe, we're running right up on my time. Do you have
Okay.
any projects or links or swag that you want to try to promote?
Sure. I mean, my website, because I've taken all my books down and I'm working on getting those published. Traditionally, there's not really a whole lot to to do with that, but I really would like to promote clutchmov.com. It's a really neat website. It's kind of one-stop shopping. They have a calendar of events that are going on in the Mid Ohio Valley. It's Parkersburg and Marietta and several other surrounding areas, surrounding towns, and it's just all about celebrating the fact that you don't have to move away from the Mid Ohio Valley to find culture, to find interesting people, to find interesting things to do. I mean, this is a theater-rich community,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a much more diverse community than you would think. And so, if you're from the Mid Ohio Valley or you're just interested in the Mid Ohio Valley, I really would want to encourage you. ClutchMOV.com. It's run by an amazing young woman named Sarah Arnold, who I call Chief, and she's just really done a great job of putting that together. So that's the big thing. But you can also look for the Shailen Adventures. You might be able to find some used copies of them somewhere. So
Spell it out for
that's
us.
pretty much all.
Spell out the title of that book so that
Which
we
one,
know.
Shailen?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well. There's several of them, but they're all under Shailen, either Shailen Adventures or Shailen Origins. Shalan.
Okay.
Um, that's actually kind of a running joke in the books. Nobody knows how to pronounce his name. They're always saying it wrong.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you being my guest. We've told some good stories, and we've walked a little bit down memory lane here. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless you, man.
Thank you. God bless you too.